Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Hannah Custis and I am a current and former member of the New York Mythology group, even though I no longer live in New York. I live in Berkeley, California, and I am currently broadcasting from Silver Spring, Maryland at my Aunt Barbara's house, who is joining me in the other room. And I'm just so delighted to have you here. I see a lot of new faces, a couple familiar faces, and I'll say a few things about myself first. So I am a Joseph Campbell fan since I was a teenager, since I was 16 and saw The Power of Myth. And I've been following the road of my bliss wherever it's led me. And of course it led me to California, to the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I'm a Ph.D. candidate in the East-West Psychology program. My dissertation research is on men's experiences of grief using myth and storytelling and writing. Actually, my dissertation research follows a workshop model quite like what we'll do tonight. Before this evening is over, I'll give everyone my email address too if they want to stay in touch with me, if they're interested in any of that. Over the last 15 years, I've had several different jobs. I worked with children for a long time. I was a reading teacher, an after-school geography teacher. I've been an ESL instructor for adults. I've taught English 101 at a community college. And right now I'm working with the City College of San Francisco. So I've had multiple lives. And I would also like to share, this is, I think, really auspicious that I'm back with the New York Mythology group. I gave my first presentation with them in 2012 when I was living in New York City, and it was called Little Red Riding Hood Just Met a Goblin Shark, which was a line from one of my students that was about children's relationship to myths and fairy tales. So tonight, I'm taking a little bit of a different vein. So I'll start out by saying, I've said it before, tonight's workshop will be interactive. I'll give you a little agenda right now, which is I'm going to do a brief presentation. And I want to let you know that I'm not approaching this from the role of expert. This is a story that I discovered. I'll tell you a little bit about the story behind the story later. And I did research on my own to bring this to you. In the format of the Mythical Writing Workshop. So there'll be a little presentation, which is to be evocative and imaginative, as well as, at least slightly informative. And then we'll pause and we'll have a discussion on the theme, and anyone is welcome to join. Again, we are recording, so if you don't want your voice heard, you can either abstain or you can let Emily know later. And the same thing with your video, you can have that on or off, and I think Emily will do some editing with that too. And we'll have a conversation on the theme, and then I'll tell a specific story. Tonight, I want to tell a story about Cardea, who is the goddess of the Hinge, a little lesser known Roman goddess. And then we will have another discussion, and there'll be an associative writing activity. And it is a free writing activity. So there's no need to be a mythologist or a writer in order to participate. It's going to be an evocative evening as we go through into the new year, and hopefully some thoughts and some images will be stirred up for people. I think that's all I'll say about myself and about the agenda. I do want to say that there are two divinities who are in my mind tonight. One of them is Hermes, or Mercury, who is the god of communication. So I hope he's on our side tonight and that we can enjoy few technical difficulties, if any. He's also the god of liminal spaces, and he's a trickster god. So that's excellent because we are in a liminal time right here between the new year coming and the year that we just left behind. We'll talk more about that later. And I also want to acknowledge, I have a candle burning for Saint Barbara. And I have to mention this because I got this from my Aunt Barbara, whose house I am joining you from, and she is my patron saint. The woman herself is my patroness for all of my life, so I have to thank Saint Barbara, and I have to thank Barbara Sear as well, without whom this wouldn't be possible. Me coming to you from here tonight, and I think that's all I'll say before I kind of jump into a presentation. I've got a little PowerPoint. I'm not a PowerPoint expert by any means, but let me see if I can do a share for you. And I'll go through this relatively slowly. And all right, I'm going to make everyone's screen small. So can everybody see this? You can just show me a thumbs up. You can all see my screen. Excellent. And if you don't already, if you're seeing everybody's face, then you can go up to the top and toggle and hide the thumbnail views if you want to have a better view. All right, so tonight I'm bringing you portals, thresholds, and doorways to other worlds. And this is a mythical writing workshop, and I'm facilitating it, and it's hosted by the New York Mythology Group. Emily already spoke a little bit about that, and I'm really grateful to be back with you all. I feel like some things have come full circle. So are you all ready to enter? Here's our portal. So if we're ready, we'll go on into just some introductory material. So, all right, so portal is from the Latin word porta, or the city gate, and there's also the verb portare, I don't speak Latin, portare, which means to carry. And I just did a little word association here. So we might use our passport to cross through a portal, and we can be transported in a variety of different ways. We may be transported. We may board at a port, a railroad station, a seaport, an airport. If you're in a boat, you may look through the porthole or the small window to see your surroundings. And we can be transported physically. We may also be transported in our minds and our imaginations. We are transported to other worlds through movies, through books, through conversations with others, through myths and legends. So this word, gives us a lot to think about. I also wanted to talk a little bit about thresholds, and the Latin word for threshold is limen. I made it sound like it was a fruit, I'm sorry. But one definition of that is the point on the ground under the portal. So you think of maybe a groom carrying a bride over a threshold, if you want to go super traditional, heteronormative there. I guess any spouse can carry any other over the threshold. So it may be that point. A threshold is also a boundary or an entry point. And you may know the definition of threshold as the magnitude or intensity that must be exceeded for a certain reaction, phenomenon, result, or condition to occur or be manifested. So another way of thinking about that is our threshold of awareness. I put the words supraliminal and subliminal. We've probably all heard of subliminal as in subliminal messages, but we're thinking of something that is either above, that is in our consciousness, supraliminal, or something that's below our conscious awareness, subliminal. I also wanted to introduce this idea of a liminal space, which is the space in between when one is crossing over from one point into another. This is also a trickster space. You may know some different trickster legends. I'm thinking of Coyote in particular, who likes to be on the road. And the god Mercury or Hermes is also known for being on the road, for going back and forth, for not being at one specific location or city or town or another, but in that space between. And I also came across this idea of liminality, which is a condition. And in anthropology, liminality is the quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle stage of a rite of passage, when participants no longer hold their pre-ritual status, but have not yet begun the transition to the status that they will when the rite is complete. So if you know a little bit about rites of passage, there is a time of separation from the world that you knew before, from your role or your status in that world, and you enter into an unknown. And there is some kind of an initiation or initiatory process that you undergo. And then there's a return. And upon that return, you assume a new role of some kind. That's something that you've learned or been tested through your initiation. I feel that my life is in a constant state of liminality, and that I'm never one place or another, that I'm constantly in between. Maybe that's just characteristic of academia or being in a PhD program, but you're in that in-between space for a long time. And I also wanted to mention a book that I've read at least once in a time. It's a transition, and it's called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. And he describes a liminal space that many of us can go through in life when we've either ended a career or ended a relationship, or we've assumed a new role of some kind, maybe as a parent. there's this in-between space, and he likens it to if you're crossing a street and you've stepped off of one curb, but you haven't quite made it to the other, and you're in the middle of the street. And maybe in that time you start to wonder, how did I get here? Why am I here? What am I doing? Why did I leave behind what I left behind? Am I going to ever make it to the other side? Some of us might be feeling that very much now. I'm especially thinking of our current political situation, and that we are in a time of transition. And it's not looking to be a smooth transition, but hopefully we can make it from one side to another. So that's just a little food for thought there. Okay. And then I wanted to give an homage to some doorways to other worlds. And some of you may even, I'm sure most of you know the examples that I'm going to pull from, actually. And we'll have time to share our own examples too when we come to a discussion period. So this is a book and a series of BBC movies from the late 80s that really made an impact on me. So here I got a little tribute to Lucy opening the wardrobe that's going to lead her into Narnia, a very Christian otherworld, but an otherworld nonetheless, and a beloved series of books and movies for some. And then I chose this image because this image reminds me of The Golden Compass. Some of you may be familiar with that series of books, Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials. And they've done one movie and an HBO series on it now that I think is still in progress. But there's a scene at the end of the first book where the character Lyra because of a ritual that's done, they're able to build a bridge to another world that she's able to cross into. And later in the subsequent book, we meet a character who has a knife that can cut through different dimensions and go into other worlds. And also this image makes me think a little bit too, when we think of other worlds or passages to other worlds or gates that we might cross through, I think also some of you may know the story of Jacob's ladder. When Jacob fought with the angel Gabriel and lost, the following night he had a dream of a ladder that was stretching up to heaven, and the people climbing that ladder. So that picture reminds me of that. I'll also mention, I didn't do a whole section on bridges. That could easily be a whole other writing workshop, but a bridge can also connect one world to the other. And in some mythologies, the rainbow is a bridge. In Norse mythology, it's the bridge of the gods. And then in Christian thought or Christian mythology, if you will, you also have the the rainbow as the pact between Jehovah and Noah, that there will not be a flooding again. So something that's crossing over from the divine to the human. And then when I showed this to my aunt, she immediately knew. She says, Outlander! So some of you may be familiar with the Outlander series of books, which I read as a young adult, and then again as when I was a bit older. But this is something I found on the internet, but it immediately thought of the Standing Stones, where Claire is able to, through some kind of magic, there's always some kind of fairy magic involved, in these kind of things, but the protagonist is able to go back in time. She's transported through these standing stones in Scotland, and she's 200 some years in the past. So that's what this image is reminding me of. Then I wasn't a big a fan of this as my mother and some of my classmates, but some of you may recognize this as Stargate. I remember the movie with James Spader and Kurt Russell. My mother loved Kurt Russell, but a door, again, a gate that's leading us into other dimensions, that's leading us into the realm of the gods. And then I think I've got one more image here. And then these are some of my favorites. These I found, and they were in a book that I had when I was young by Alan Lee and I want to say Brian Froud. I don't know if it's, but they did a book of fairies. And here is a whole mythology about the fairy hills, or the other world that you can cross into. And you might have, find a path, either a door in the rock or a door in the hill or in some kind of natural landscape that leads you into to the whole fairy court, the whole world that's there. And if you read some of these stories, it's not always a wonderful place. The fairies are known for having their magic and their glamour. So humans may think that they're in, you know, this stunning palace surrounded by finery, excuse me, but then they may find later that it's all just a spell that's been cast upon them. And fairies have been known for, you know, being beneficent to humans when it suits them. But this was something that I dreamed of as a child. This particular picture too on the right, that door in the rock, I always wanted to find that, you know, or to find Narnia, or to find some place that I would flip into another world. So I'll stop the share here. So this is probably not new to many people, but he is a character in our story tonight, and he is the god that this month is named after. Actually, let me pause. I'm going to read what Al B wrote. Death is but a door, since Jews often value religious education. Maybe in Jewish tradition, having obscure religious literary knowledge lets you enter special places. Thank you, Al. So we're how to enter through various doors. We have here, such as law school, yeah. Definitely specialized knowledge. And I bet getting into and out of law school, you probably have to know the right people and the right words, the very specific knowledge. Thank you. So we have here the god Janus, who is, as many of you are familiar, is the god that January is named after. And we are in a liminal space. So Janus is the god of doorways, of gates. He is the god of beginnings and endings and transition. And you can probably, he's very recognizable because of his double heads. He's able to look in the past and the future, kind of like we are right now, you know, still thinking about the year in review, what went wrong, what went right, if anything, and the year coming forward and what our hopes and dreams are for that. He symbolizes change and transition, such as that from past to future, from the different stages of life, from going from one world to the other. He was worshipped at the beginning of harvest and planting, and also marriages, birth, and other beginnings. And he has a porter's staff and a set of keys to let him into doors. And I also like this image on the left, this particular coin, because it shows what it looks like to me, a young or unbearded Janus and an older component. So I like that he's able to signify both of these stages of life at the same time. And I saw some images, and I'm looking at this one now, it's a little hard to tell, but the actual hair of the two different heads is braided together, showing this synthesis of the old and the new, the young and the old, the past and the future. And Janus is a greatly revered god. I was reading that before prayers to Jupiter, or Zeus for Jupiter for the Romans, they would often invoke Janus first. And part of the reason that I bring him up, and I'll follow into the story that'll have him in it, is because every image I've seen, and I will tell you at the beginning of this new year, every newsletter I've got for every organization I've ever patronized ever has been sending out a newsletter, and about 80% of them have something about Janus in it. So everybody, he's well known, well respected. He kind of has an austere and dignified demeanor about him, or at least to me. I don't know if that's how he was worshipped by the Romans, but that's certainly the sense that I get. So I was actually surprised to hear the story that I'm going to tell tonight, that I'm going to get into now. Did that go? Oh, this computer is a lag time, so let's see. Oh no, you did it. Here we go. All right. So this is the story of Cardea, who is the goddess of the Hinge, and this is the story of how she acquires that role. And I read this story it's not something that I was just thinking one day, oh, I wonder if there's a goddess of the Hinge, let me look that up. I actually came across her story when I was sitting in my advisor's office 2 years ago at least. And my advisor in my school was in the women's spirituality department. And I was sitting in front of a bookshelf of her and her office mates, you know, all these books about different goddess religions. And I picked one up, and it was like an alphabetized book of major and minor goddesses. And there was an entry on Cardea. And when I read her story, I was surprised, and I was also moved by it in a bittersweet way. And I didn't want her to be forgotten, because we hear so much about Janus. His iconography is everywhere, even, you know, millennia after the time that he was worshipped. Although you can't tell me we're not worshiping him now. I think anytime we have iconography or tell stories, we're taking part in some kind of worship or belief. But I don't, you know, very little about her. And the story that I'm going to tell tonight, you know, I found it through an internet search. So again, I'm not an expert, but I wanted to relate it. And this might be just an example of poetic license by Ovid, who wrote a 6-book poem called the Ph.D, or also called the Book of Days, or the 6 books of the calendar. He wrote it in AD 8. You know, what a great year that was, AD 8. But and he might have conflated a few stories in it and took some poetic license. But I think I think that if anyone believes in a story, or if a story is told enough, it gains its own legitimacy, even if it may have been something that the author took from or conflated from other sources. So Cardea is known otherwise as the goddess of the hinge. In this poem by Ovid, he calls her Karna, which is another goddess who is associated with being the protector of the heart, and he kind of brings them to so I'll call her Cardea in this story, because he does mention her as the goddess of the hinge. And she is born in the sacred grove of the god Alernus, who I don't really know that much about. And she, in her early life as a nymph, she is very much like the huntress Diana. Many of you may know the goddess of the hunt, Diana for the Romans, Artemis for the Greeks, except instead of a bow, she used hunting javelins in a net. And she was very beautiful. I've never heard of an unbeautiful nymph, so we just assume she's beautiful because she's a nymph. But she was also a virgin. And when potential lovers tried to seduce her, you know, in the forest, in the sacred grove, she would claim that there was a lack of privacy, and she would have them lead the way. She said, "You lead and I follow," and she would have them lead the way to a secluded cave. And then when they went into the cave, she would hide and camouflage herself in the bushes outside. So this was her trick, and she managed to protect herself this way for a while. And then she caught the eyes, I guess all 4 of them. She caught the eyes of Janus, and he tries to sweet talk her, and she plays along, you know, like she does with everyone else. And she tries the same ruse. But as many of you already see this coming, there's really nowhere to hide from Janus. Because he's able to look forward and backward at the same time, he's able to see her hiding in the bushes. And then we can imagine what happens next. In a lot of these different stories, consent was not a word in the ancient vocabulary. And some lines from the poem say she was powerless. It repeats this line, "Mythologist, you can do nothing." And the god occupies her with his embrace, which is a euphemistic way of saying rape, you know, more or less. He occupies her with his embrace. And then afterwards, he treats it like a contractual exchange, which I don't know if this is something that is that's a tendency of this god, or if this is a circumstantial and special to this case, but he treats it like they had an agreement of some kind. And he says, that there's a contract between them. And he says, "In exchange for our intercourse, the right of the hinge will be yours. Take that as a payment for the virginity you deposited." And there's something about that just gives me the creeps. And so he makes her, and, you know, in exchange for giving her virginity, which I'm sure she didn't consent to and didn't want to give him, he makes her the goddess of the hinge. And I tried to find a picture of a pivot hinge. That's what's there in the middle. Again, I am not an architect or a hinge maker, but he is, which is the pivot hinge is, I guess, the specific ones used by the ancient Romans. And he also gives her a hawthorn branch. And I believe that's what she's carrying on the picture, on both the pictures that are here on the left and the right. And the hawthorn branch has the power to repel injurious influences from the house. And there's further stories that she becomes either this god or goddess, or another one she's conflated with is known for using this hawthorn branch to preside over doorways to protect children from these harpy vampire bird demons that would prey on them. So I guess that's, you know, good to get protection from the harpies. And the interpretation that I was reading of this story talks about the hinge as the turning point, and it talks about this particular turning point for Cardea as being her as a goddess of the wilderness to being the goddess that watches over the domestic portal. That she polices the thresholds and boundaries of domesticity. Whether or not she wanted this, whether this was a fair exchange, I highly doubt. But I'll just leave the story there. So she, and then when I looked up versions of Cardea, they speak of her powers in protecting children. They speak of her as the goddess of the hinge. And in one of them, it was like, she was believed to be the lover of Janus. And I was like, oh, that's a great way to put it, huh? So I think I'll just stop there. I may be rambling a bit, but I wanted to just take a second and, an allegory for marriage contracts. Well, perhaps, yeah, being tamed and being domesticated and having to stay by the door at home, it could be allegory. But I just want to open it up because from if there's thoughts that you have or something that comes to you, I have an interpretation that I like to share, but I'll hear some of your thoughts first. So I don't have this fully formed, but I've been thinking about this story for a little while now, and I don't want to sugarcoat over the assault that she suffers at the hands of Janus. And at the same time, I agree with Barbara that this is an important role. And so I don't want to think about it in the terms of the exchange, that things even out. And I also don't want to be falsely positive, but all I could think about was hymen and a vaginal canal. Essentially, that she's because of after this assault, and we see this in Greek goddesses and even in the Virgin Mary, that their virginity gets restored to them through some magical power or not. So I don't think it's so much that maybe her physical virginity gets restored, but the whole symbolism behind being able to have a boundary. And as Barbara was saying, without the hinge, the door isn't going to function. It's not going to be open or closed. And I was thinking about how she kept telling these would-be lovers earlier that there wasn't enough privacy. We can't have sex here. We're in the woods. There's no privacy. So she would send them off to this cave. But at the same time, the door is what allows privacy and what allows the barrier, what keeps what you want in and what you want out. So I don't know if, and then there's all this idea of virginity, not nearly as physical sex before, but Ed Harding talks about, who's the women's spirituality scholar, talks about the virgin belonging to herself. So it wasn't that you were innocent in experience, but in your virginity, you belong to yourself. And I don't know if that's part of that she gets some kind of autonomy back, that she gets some kind of power back, and that she also gets some kind of, I want to say agency, but there might be a word that's better than that. Some control over the door, who comes in, who comes out, who stays, who goes. And that she is able to, in that boundary is firm, and it's also negotiable. It's not locked forever. And then we have a comment in the chat. Representing women's interiority, that you belong to yourself, that your thoughts are yours, your body is yours. And in a lot of times when we see a a virgin goddess, especially in the Greek, it's like, who can blame them? You know, what are your choices? You know, you either militantly defend your virginity or you're taken advantage of by, you know, anyone who looks at you. So I would like to think that there is some kind of regaining power, and there might also be some kind of, again, I'm not saying it's a literal exchange or an even exchange, but that's something that comes out of it that she's able to have power over. All right, so let's just try this, and this will keep us going a little bit. So we've talked about a couple different topics here tonight, but what I'd like to do is just try like a word association exercise. So this is often can be done in the chat box. That's a good way to do it, or you can just shout it out and I can write it. But what are some words or phrases that are sticking with you after talking about the theme, hearing a story, hearing a couple stories, and our conversations? What words or phrases stick with you? All right, so this is how it works. This is a playful exercise, and Emily, we might want to pause the recording while we do this because we're going to do a timed free write. And so what we'll do is, from this list, pick up to 3 words or phrases. I don't recommend more than 3 because then it kind of becomes unwieldy. And of the 3 that you pick, it's going to be the title. Just write that at the top of your page. And then what we'll do is we'll do a 10-minute free write. And this is completely associative. There's no right or wrong. And I'll say this, someone who's come to these workshops, and I always do the same activity, it's my favorite, but someone who's come to this workshop since before has said, you know, they're stuck, they're not creative, they don't know what to do. If you are really that stuck, see how many words you can use, just as a game, just see how many you can use and have fun with it. But this is totally stress-free. And what we'll do is I'll ask Emily to pause while we do a 10-minute, I'll put a timer on my phone. And then I usually keep the recording off during the shares. I might, so that just takes the pressure off of anyone. So the first, you don't have to worry about your free writing being shared if you don't want it to.